"Mommy hasn't eaten, can you share expired bread?" the boy asked while single dad CEO walked into. Snow drifted through the quiet morning air like tiny frozen feathers, gently covering the streets of downtown Boston in a soft, glittering blanket. The holiday lights flickered across shop windows, casting warm reflections on the icy sidewalks. But amid all the festive brightness, one small, heartbreaking scene remained painfully out of place. A little boy stood barefoot outside a bakery window, his toes red from the biting cold, his tattered coat barely clinging to his thin shoulders. His hands were pressed against the glass as though he were trying to feel the warmth of the fresh bread on the other side. His hair was messy, his face pale, but his eyes held something even more devastating than hunger, hope mixed with quiet desperation. And then came his shaking whisper as he looked up at the woman behind the counter inside the store, a whisper that would break even the hardest heart. He asked if there was any expired bread he could take, not for himself, but because his mommy hadn't eaten in 2 days. If this opening already touches your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and comment below if you believe everyone deserves a second chance. Your engagement helps more people see meaningful stories like this. Inside the same bakery, only a few feet away but living in an entirely different world, stood a sharply dressed man in a navy wool coat. His posture was impeccable, his expression always controlled, and his presence carried the undeniable aura of power. This was Jonathan Hale, one of the youngest CEOs in the country and a single father raising his 3-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. He had stepped into the bakery that morning only because Elizabeth loved their cinnamon rolls. He wasn't a man who lingered in shops, nor one who often paused to notice the world around him. But this time was different. The moment he stepped through the snowy doorway and saw the barefoot child at the counter, he froze mid-step. Elizabeth clutched her pastry, smiling innocently, unaware of the ache that began to twist in her father's chest. Jonathan had built his empire on discipline, control, and forward momentum. Ever since losing his wife during childbirth, he had trained himself to avoid distractions, emotions, anything that could slow him down or expose him to pain again. But seeing a child, someone no older than Elizabeth, standing barefoot on a frozen floor begging for old bread broke through every wall he had ever built. His eyes drifted to the bakery worker, who seemed uncomfortable, torn between rules and compassion. The boy kept pointing at the loaves, his small voice carrying through the quiet store as he explained that the bread didn't need to be fresh, he only needed something, anything, because his mommy had given him the last food they had 2 nights ago. The warmth of the bakery made the scene even more heartbreaking. The glowing Christmas lights, the decorated tree in the corner, the smell of cinnamon and butter, it all contrasted starkly with the child who clearly didn't belong in such comfort. Jonathan felt the sting of something unfamiliar, a guilt he couldn't name, and a memory he wished he didn't have. He remembered being a child himself once, clutching his mother's hand at a grocery store after his father abandoned them, watching her spend the last of her money on a single loaf of bread. He remembered the look in her eyes, the same look he now saw reflected in this little boy. The bakery employee hesitated, and Jonathan could see the store manager watching her from the back with an impatient glare, clearly waiting to see if she would break company rules by giving away food. The boy's fingers curled tightly into his worn jacket. He didn't cry. Somehow, that made it even worse. He stood still, shivering, waiting, hoping. Jonathan stepped forward, his shoes clicking sharply against the tile, startling both the boy and the staff. He didn't speak because he didn't need to. His expression said everything. The bakery worker immediately turned and gathered not just old bread, but several fresh pastries, muffins, and a large loaf still warm from the oven. She placed them in a paper bag and pushed it toward the boy. But the boy stepped back and shook his head, explaining that he couldn't pay for it, that they didn't have any money, that he only wanted whatever was old or thrown out. The innocence in that moment shattered something inside Jonathan. He didn't know when he had moved, but suddenly he was kneeling beside the little boy, his daughter watching him with wide eyes. Jonathan placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and told him to take everything. The boy looked confused, almost frightened, as though kindness was something he wasn't used to receiving. When Jonathan stood again and paid for not just the food but extra bags filled with more items, the staff looked surprised, the customers softened, and Elizabeth smiled, clutching her pastry as though she understood her father had done something good, something important. The boy held the heavy bags awkwardly, nearly dropping them because his tiny arms weren't strong enough. Jonathan quickly took the bags from him and asked him to show where his mother was. The boy nodded eagerly, relief breaking through his exhaustion, and walked out into the bitter snow. Jonathan followed, holding Elizabeth close, his breath fogging in the icy air. The boy led them through side streets, across an alley, and toward an abandoned building where a small, drafty storage room had been turned into a makeshift shelter. There, curled on a thin blanket, was a young woman, barely in her late 20s, pale as winter, shivering violently even under several torn layers of clothing. Her name was Grace. She lifted her head weakly when she heard footsteps, and when she saw her son, her face filled with both overwhelming love and crushing guilt. She tried to sit up straight, apologizing instantly for her appearance, her condition, her inability to offer hospitality she didn't have. She looked at Jonathan with eyes full of embarrassment, gratitude, and fear all mixed together. It was clear she had been hiding from the world, surviving only through strength she didn't know she had, all for the sake of her child. Jonathan noticed everything, the way she tried to stand even though her legs trembled from hunger, the way she pushed her son behind her protectively, the way she looked at the food bags as though she wasn't sure it was real. He also noticed the cold. The kind of cold that seeped into bones and made survival uncertain. He didn't understand how she had endured this long with a child. And though he was a man of logic and caution, something inside him knew without question that leaving them there was not an option. He brought Grace and her son, Noah, to his car. Grace protested at first, panicked, saying she didn't want charity, didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to take advantage of a stranger. But Jonathan wasn't acting out of charity. He was acting out of conviction, something deeper than obligation. Maybe it was because he understood struggle. Maybe because he missed the chance to save someone he had loved. Maybe because he saw in Grace what he wished someone had seen in his mother years ago. Whatever the reason, he insisted. Not forcefully, but firmly enough that Grace's resistance finally wilted under the weight of exhaustion. The warmth of the car made Grace cry silently, tears rolling down her cheeks as Noah held her hand tightly. Elizabeth, innocent and cheerful, offered Noah her half-eaten pastry, and Noah accepted it with a smile that momentarily erased all the pain he had endured. Jonathan drove them to a private clinic where Grace was evaluated. Malnutrition, exhaustion, early-stage pneumonia, they listed the conditions one after another while Jonathan listened with growing concern. She needed rest. She needed warmth. She needed time to recover. And Noah needed stability. Jonathan arranged everything without blinking. Clothes for Noah. A room at a nearby hotel for Grace. A full medical plan covered entirely by him. Grace tried to refuse again, but Jonathan finally told her she didn't owe him anything, and that helping her wasn't taking from him, it was giving him a chance to do something meaningful, something right. Over the next week, Jonathan found himself visiting the hotel every day. Elizabeth adored Noah, and the two children became inseparable, filling Grace's room with laughter and tiny footsteps. Grace slowly regained strength, though she still felt overwhelmed by the situation, unsure why someone like Jonathan would care so much. She told him bits of her story, how she had lost her job, how her landlord evicted her when she couldn't pay rent, how she sold everything she owned to keep Noah fed. She had applied for dozens of jobs but was turned away because of gaps in her work history, because she had a child with no one to watch him, because life had knocked her down too many times to count. Jonathan listened, feeling something shift inside him each time she spoke. Grace wasn't weak, she was extraordinary. Her love for her child was fierce, sacrificial, and unbreakable. She had survived storms most people couldn't imagine. And Jonathan found himself wanting to give her more than help, He wanted to give her a chance. Winter settled over Boston once again, blanketing the city in a soft, silver glow. The kind of winter that made people hurry home, wrap themselves in warmth, and gather with family. For Jonathan Hale, Grace Miller, and their children, this season held a deeper meaning. It marked one full year since the morning when a barefoot little boy had changed everything. It marked 1 year since life had shifted from loneliness and struggle into something fuller, brighter, richer. Jonathan had poured his time into becoming not only a CEO, but a father who finally learned how to laugh again. Grace had found her strength, her voice, and a community that valued her. Noah and Elizabeth were like twin sparklers, inseparable lights that filled every room with energy. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts, often at the moment when everything seems perfect. Jonathan's company, Hale Group International, stood on the edge of its biggest expansion yet. Competitors had been circling like wolves, waiting for him to slip. And when word leaked of his new humanitarian initiatives, programs for single parents, company-funded childcare, job placement for the homeless, housing support for struggling families, business rivals whispered that Jonathan was becoming too soft, too distracted by emotions to lead effectively. Investors grew nervous. Board members muttered behind closed doors. The pressure mounted like a coming storm, dark clouds gathering over the life he had carefully rebuilt. One icy December morning, just days before Christmas, Jonathan walked into the office expecting normal meetings. Instead, he stepped into chaos. A major investor had pulled out of a critical deal overnight. Stock prices dipped. A competing firm made a public claim that Jonathan's new social programs were financially irresponsible. Rumors spread fast, quicker than truth ever could. Jonathan remained calm on the outside, but inside, something cracked. Not fear for himself. Fear for the people who depended on him. His employees. Their families. And yes, Grace and Noah too. For the first time in months, he felt the suffocating weight of the old loneliness creeping back in, the belief that he needed to carry everything alone, that love was fragile, temporary, something life could take away just as quickly as it had given. He tried to hide the stress from Grace, but she noticed. She always noticed. The way he stared too long at his paperwork. The way he held his breath without realizing. The way his shoulders stayed tight even when he pretended to smile. Grace didn't push him. She simply stayed close, offering the quiet kind of support that didn't demand answers but reminded him he wasn't alone. But the storm wasn't done yet. One evening, as the children played with the Christmas decorations in Jonathan's living room, Elizabeth giggling as Noah tried to place ornaments too high for him, Jonathan received a devastating phone call. A scandal had surfaced online claiming that Grace was only hired because she was involved with him. The source was anonymous, but the damage was immediate. The press loved the story. The internet devoured it. Grace's photo circulated everywhere. The same woman who had once hidden in a freezing storage room was suddenly being dragged through headlines she never asked for. Grace felt humiliated. Shaken. Even though she had done nothing wrong, the entire world had painted her as someone dishonest, as someone using Jonathan for survival. Old wounds resurfaced, deeper and sharper than before. She remembered the people who had doubted her, judged her, rejected her. She remembered every job she lost. Every room she slept in that wasn't safe. Every moment she had tried to be strong for Noah while the world looked at her with suspicion instead of compassion. She tried to hide her tears, but Jonathan found her standing alone in the darkened hallway, shaking silently. In that moment, something primal rose inside him, not anger, but protection. He held her without hesitation, without fear, without worrying about what the world would say. For Jonathan, there was no reputation worth more than Grace. But Grace feared something else. She feared that she was becoming a burden. That her presence was hurting his career. That maybe she and Noah didn't belong in his world after all. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, she visited the hotel where she and Noah had once stayed when Jonathan first helped them. The memories washed over her: cold floors, hunger, uncertainty. It reminded her how far she had come, and how quickly life could take everything away. She stood there lost in thought when Noah tugged her sleeve, asking if they were moving back here. Grace's heart broke. She realized she was letting fear rewrite the story she had fought so hard to build. Meanwhile, Jonathan faced his board in an emergency meeting. They questioned everything: his decisions, his priorities, even his personal life. For years, Jonathan had been emotionless, sharp, untouchable. But today, he didn't hide behind a polished corporate mask. He stood tall, defending not just his leadership, but Grace's dignity. He told the board that compassion was not a weakness, that building a business without humanity was a hollow victory, and that helping a mother and child wasn't a scandal, it was a responsibility every capable human being should embrace. Some board members were moved. Others weren't. But the turning point came when employees, hundreds of them, marched into the lobby holding handmade signs that read, "We stand with Grace. Leadership means compassion. Noah deserved that bread. Jonathan Hale saved a family, now we save him." The media captured it instantly. The story flipped. A narrative that once tried to shame Grace transformed into one that celebrated Jonathan's humanity. Investors shifted. Stock prices stabilized. Competitors backed away. And for the first time in days, Jonathan breathed again. But he didn't go home to celebrate. He went to find Grace. He found her at the frozen entrance of the old hotel, staring at the snow as though trying to find answers hidden within it. She looked frightened, not of him, but of being undeserving. Of being the storm in his life instead of the calm. Jonathan stepped toward her, breath clouding in the cold. He told her what happened at the office. He told her about the employees. The media. The board. But more importantly, he told her the truth he had been afraid to say. That she wasn't a burden. She wasn't a scandal. She wasn't someone he helped out of pity. She was the reason he rediscovered joy. She was the reason he believed in family again. She was the reason he could finally heal. Grace cried, not from sadness, but relief. She had spent her entire life fighting to prove she wasn't invisible, and today, someone saw her completely. Noah and Elizabeth ran toward them with bright smiles, their small boots crunching in the snow. And when the children hugged each other tightly, it felt like a sign, a reminder that love didn't grow in perfect conditions. It grew in storms, in broken places, in moments when the world tried to tear people apart but they held on anyway. That night, Jonathan brought Grace and Noah home, not as guests, not as people he once helped, but as family. They decorated the tree together. They baked cookies Noah burned twice. They laughed until their eyes watered. Grace placed a small paper star on the top of the tree, and Jonathan lifted Noah so he could help adjust it. Elizabeth wrapped a scarf around Grace's neck, saying she looked like a Christmas angel. And Jonathan agreed silently. As the snow settled outside, Grace sat by the fireplace holding her son while Jonathan watched them with a heart no longer afraid of love. Grace realized something powerful: the world had tried to strip her dignity, her identity, her hope, but she had survived. She had risen. She had found a home, not because someone saved her, but because someone believed in her. And Jonathan realized that sometimes the greatest gift life gives isn't success or wealth or power, but a second chance wrapped in the form of two people who needed him just as much as he needed them.